Hi everyone, my name is Yessica, and today I will be presenting about the acculturation of Salvadorans in the DFW area. Okay, so now some background on El Salvador. So in 1821, it declared independence from Spain, and then it formed a union with Costa Rica, Honduras, Nicaragua, and Guatemala. But then that started falling apart. So in 1969, a lot of Salvadoran immigrants had to leave Honduras, and a civil war ended up following that. But then in 2006, the dispute between the two countries finally ended, and so did the immigration that was happening back and forth between the two countries. So, in the country, the dominant language is Spanish, but there is still a lot of indigenous languages that are spoken as well. And a fun fact about this country is that it is very compact and you notice it very easily on a map. And they're also Catholic. Like every other Latin American country, El Salvador also celebrates their Independence Day on the 15th of September. They also have Holy Week, which is very common in other countries, but what is interesting is that Salvadorans they add their own touch by making sawdust rugs. And then on August 6th, they have a celebration that celebrates their identity in relation to Jesus. And then in their cuisine, they have pupusas, tamales, just to name a few. So, why do Salvadorans immigrate? Salvadorans immigrate because of the gang violence, because of the poor living conditions that are difficult to improve, and because of poverty. The new president of this country has enforced strict laws against it, but people still report it as a reason, and this is just because the victims of gang violence they tend to be poor people, and these poor people cannot afford to move or stop working in these dangerous areas, and so they decide to take the chance and immigrate in search of a better life. Some of the pull factors are usually the work opportunities, the better wages that the United States offers, the educational opportunities for children so their children can go to school, and the safety that this country provides. So, where do Salvadorans immigrate in the United States? Here is actually a map, and in this map, the darker colored states are usually where they immigrate. And besides California, Texas is the second one that ranks highest here. And in the DFW specifically, there is a lot of restaurants and little stores that pertain to Salvadoran culture. To research the acculturation of Salvadorans in the DFW, I conducted a small 20 question survey based off the Vancouver Acculturation Index and 10 items related to Salvadoran identity, while 10 items related to the US American identity. There was just a sample size of 25 people, and a Likert scale was used. So, strongly agree was a 5, and then the strongly disagree was a 1. So, this graph represents the results of the survey that were gathered. And as you can see, in the first generation, these are Salvadoran immigrants who were more likely to adhere to their customs and values. And then the second generation, you see a little more diversity, but still, these were usually the kids of immigrants. And while this was more balanced compared to the rest, the majority still seem to identify with the American mindset. And it could be that this generation has their parents' teachings of their culture, but since they are born here, they tend to relate more to the people and the values that surrounds them. And then, of course, the third generation, these are just individuals that probably have grandparents who have been here for a long time, and they seem to identify very strongly with American values. They tend to view themselves as just another typical American, and it is easier for them to be recognized as such. They are likely to have, like I said, a grandma who is Salvadoran, but all they have left of that culture is the small percentage that has been passed down to them by their parents. And in short words, this just means that their grandparents probably passed down a percentage down to their kids, but by the time it got to their grandkids, this percentage just shortened significantly. So, to understand this research, it is important to understand the four types of acculturation, which were developed by John Barry and colleagues in 1990. And one of these acculturation types is actually assimilation. This occurs when an individual abandons their native culture, adopting the behaviors and values of their host culture. And a heritage culture is just an individual's culture of origin, and a host culture is an individual's new culture after they have moved. So this just means that they have immigrated and have now adopted what values surrounds them. Then there's integration. This is just the more balanced one. This is usually the goal of many immigrants because it usually means that they feel very comfortable in their heritage and host culture. So basically, an individual just adopts the behaviors and the values of their host culture, but they also maintain their heritage culture. So the separation type, this occurs when an individual maintains their heritage culture, not making the effort to connect with the host culture. So basically everything that they bring with them is all they choose to keep, and they do not bother to go out and make connections with new people and adopt like new values or like even consider them. And then marginalization occurs when an individual is not able to keep their heritage culture due to discrimination or exclusion that might occur when they immigrate here. But at the same time, it is difficult for them to assimilate into the host culture because of this. And this usually just causes them a lot of distress that becomes problematic as they continue to stay here. Now, each generation does fall under a different acculturation type, and of course, it does vary by individual. However, if we do depend on the research to make assumptions, it does seem like the first generation of immigrants, they tend to lean more towards separation. And the reasons behind this could be due to the many Salvadoran places in the DFW as well as the Hispanic population in the area. And these areas just make it easier to avoid speaking English and then developing new ideas that could lead to a change of values or to exhibit like different behaviors. Meanwhile, the second generation of immigrants, they did show the most integration out of all the generations, and this could be due to the access of each culture that they have. They have more of a balance. They grow up with their heritage culture at home, and then their host culture is usually available to them at school or at work. And they did score higher on American items. So, based off those scorings, we could argue that assimilation has also taken place besides integration. Then, the third generation, because most people identify with an American identity, the heritage culture they may have been raised with has been left behind to a certain degree. And so, by definition, this would mean that they have assimilated into the culture of the United States. Okay, so here are two acculturation curves. The one on the left, it is a modified version of the original one, and it was modified to resemble the Salvadoran acculturation experience based off the research. So basically, it does start off with the arrival and the host culture, and right here is usually just the peak of reported satisfaction and competence. Then the culture shock follows it, and then adjustment follows it. And when Salvadorans adjust, they usually do it by establishing communities with other Salvadorans. And this is why integration, the last stage of acculturation, in the original curve, it tends to be higher, but here for Salvadoran immigrants, it is actually more leveled off. and this is because the first generation Salvadoran immigrants, they tend to retain more of their values and their traditions. Then on the right is a different curve, and this usually applies more to second and third generation because as they feel more connected to the US culture and the way of life here, then there is higher levels of satisfaction and competence reported. So, in conclusion, Salvadorans, they are a diverse group full of traditions and values that they bring with them when they immigrate. They also, depending on how the immigration experience is, they may become marginalized or they may assimilate. And it is just important to keep up with the experience of immigrant groups in the community because it is all an exchange. So the group gives to the community and the community gives back to them. So basically, it just affects us all. And then here are just my references. Thank you.